Okay, so this is my first episode as a host of the SCP podcast. I am Dr. Ryan C. Warner. I'm a consultant psychologist, and today I have the honor of having Dr. Gabrielle Jones here with me. And thank you so much for being here, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Warner. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. So just to give you a background, I'm the new Advocacy Domain Lead for SCP Division 13. And the purpose of the advocacy domain is to advocate for issues that are impacting consulting psychologists. So one way we do that is through the SCP podcast. So today I want to hear your voice. I want to hear your story, and just identify, how are you advocating, for issues relevant, to the SCP members, for SCP members, and for consultant psychologists in general. So I'm really honored to have the opportunity to meet with you today. As before today, we got the chance to know each other in the past, right? And we met in person recently at the APA conference. So yes, I'm really honored to get to know you a little bit more today. So I first just want to start with, tell me more about yourself and how you got into the field of consultant psychology.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think it has a lot of tentacles. So there are a lot of things that led up to or that culminated into me becoming a consulting psychologist. But the main thing, and I think the thing that pertains most to this podcast is the gaps. So in systems, I often saw gaps in treatment. I saw gaps in policy. I saw gaps in acknowledgement and awareness and understanding. And at a system level, it's really hard to address those gaps if you are an individual contributor,
Hmm.
unless you have a specific role dedicated to culture change and transformation. And so in the various systems that I was in, I found myself attempting to do consulting work, and on top of my job of being a direct care provider or being a supervisor, depending on the hat that I wore in the system that I was in. And so I recognized that in order to actually drive systemic and institutional change, I had to transition into consulting, and having the business acumen coupled with the psychological foundations in practice, I think that melded together to build my praxis as a consulting psychologist overall.
Great. Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm sure that a lot of the members can relate to that type of journey. I mean, I began my role as a consultant, based on similar process. I was a clinical trained psychologist, and as you saw, I saw the gaps, and I recognized, yeah, to make true systemic change, right, we have to be able to engage in that consulting practice. So I'm curious, throughout your role as a consultant, trying to shift that system, what have been some issues that maybe you have seen that have came up within the organizations that you work with?
Systems issues in terms of as a consultant and
Yeah,
barriers, or yeah, so or go ahead.
yeah, no. So based on your work with systems, like what like as a clinician and as a consultant, what have been the most significant challenges that you've seen organizations face?
I think that the biggest thing that I've recognized is and I do primarily work with government funded organizations and nonprofits. And so they will bring me in if they have an existing contract with an entity doing my specialty. My subspecialty is culturally responsive substance use treatment.
Hmm.
So I'll have an organization come to me and say, hey, we want to change our program, we want to transform our work to be more equitable. And we have this organization that provides direct care substance use treatment, and they're building a program. What do we do? What do we need so that it is equitable, so that we're reaching the intended audiences and the intended groups that we have historically not been able to treat? And the barrier starts there, is that question, though, is great when they're already working with an organization that has a set way of doing things. um, there's not as much flexibility in how they can meet the needs of the population that's intended. and the pairing of the existing organization that they're working with and the limitations of their government contracts makes the work for me, quite frankly, more interesting because it is a challenge. But it tends to be something that organizations will shy away from because they're afraid that it's too challenging.
Hmm. Definitely. So, yeah, can you be more specific there? I'm curious, when it comes to working with that type of, group of population, when they want to create more equity or inclusion within the workplace, is that pertaining to how they can better serve their clients? Is that, culture responsive type of treatment modalities, or is that within the staff, and team dynamics? I'm
Yeah.
curious, and maybe all of those aspects, it seems like
It
maybe.
is. It's all three. So working with the system to create programs that are more relevant and culturally responsive to the communities they serve, but also um, increasing equity and cultural responsiveness among their staff in their workforce. So, for example, Mental Health Awareness Month, I did short videos every week to help um, leaders consider alternatives to the different holidays in May. So, you have Memorial Day weekend per se, and a lot of people will have events with their staff or with their workforce that involve drinking or involve alcohol,
Mhm.
and they're not taking into consideration the needs of their workforce who don't drink or who choose not to drink, are in recovery, or maybe who are pregnant.
Yeah.
And so having that lens and thinking more culturally and responsive about how to approach their workforce, especially with COVID, having people coming back into the office and doing that strategically, being culturally responsive and aware of dynamics such as childcare or religious holidays or cultural awareness months, and just being more in tune, if you will, as we transition out of COVID, post pandemic, and this new way of doing life that we're all adapting to.
Mhm.
And as it pertains specifically to substance use treatment, your programs are historically dealt in abstinence based only. And so we're in a world transition, a culture where abstinence is not the only answer and only approach. So I do some change management in that regard as well to help organizations shift their perspective to a more harm reduction approach when it comes to substance use specifically.
Definitely. And if I can recall, your doctorate degree is in counseling psychology. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so that's I think when we think about our background, as trained, psychologists, experts of human behavior, right? You fit perfect in that role with trying to shift systems, with trying to create more equitable practices, right? And for those listening, especially students or those wanting to transition from clinical to consulting, right? Just know that, yeah, we are perfectly trained, to be experts, to make those system changes. So yeah, that's great. Uh,
Yeah.
and it seems like you've been able to use your specialty and your training of substance use to advocate, for these particular, issues within the workplaces that you serve. So tell me more about that. How, when it comes to advocacy, um, tell me more about how you advocate for those equitable practices. Is there any other ways that may look?
Yeah, so I actually wrote a book. It's called Culturally Responsive Substance Use Treatment, a practical tool for students, practitioners, and organizations. And in my book, I introduced the CRUST framework, so the Culturally Responsive Substance Use Treatment framework. And there's in the framework, there is advocacy. So there's a systemic impact, and really that focuses on how systems have impacted, whether it be positively or negatively, substance use and substance use treatment for marginalized and minoritized communities. So, in that, it has a call to practitioners to advocate on behalf of their clients for example, more access to Narcan or having that within their system. Just again, harm reduction strategies that are paid for by the government paid for by institutions that actually support staff in accomplishing their direct care um, services with regard to substance use treatment. So the system impact is really the advocacy piece of the framework that I introduced in my book. And that is a core piece to actually moving the needle and really transforming what it means to be culturally responsive overall. So, not just in substance use, but you have to look at the system's impact on specifically marginalized and minoritized groups and use the harm that those systems have caused to reduce that and increase the benefit that those systems have exhibited in the past. So one of the biggest things that I would say is a challenge, but the system impact part of the framework is important, is recognizing affirmative action. So the SCOTUS decision for that to be removed is extremely problematic. So advocacy in that area for marginalized individuals would be helpful and necessary, I think, as psychologists and as consulting psychologists, raising awareness about that decision, how it impacts the system that they're working in, and how to mitigate those types of system-wide decisions that negatively impact marginalized and minoritized groups.
Yeah. So when you say that, I was thinking about a couple of things about how advocacy has to be intentional, right? There are so many issues that may be impactful, right? But I think that for us to make that system change, right, we have to, be able to take that intentionality. So I really like how your framework, maybe encompasses some of that. And also think about, as consultant psychologists, no matter what type of specialties or industries that we work with, being able to mitigate harm, especially to historically marginalized groups, that's an ethical,
Yeah.
issue as well, right? We have to make sure that we do no harm, right?
Yes.
And in turn, no matter if we are quote unquote diverse, equity, inclusion experts or not, right? We all have that responsibility as consultant psychologists, as trained professionals, to advocate for those who are historically marginalized and who may experience some of those additional challenges within the workplace. So I really appreciate
Absolutely.
your framework and the work that you put in to advocate for that population.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, no, this is a really fun conversation for me. I'm curious, what are some just final points that maybe that you want to convey to our members? Is there any action steps that you would encourage them to take when it comes to advocating for these type of the issues?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing I would want people to take away from listening to this is, if you recognize that there are gaps in an institution or in a treatment setting or in your organization for which you're providing consultation, as a consultant, it's your responsibility to raise awareness of those gaps and tie the impact that those gaps have to the communities that your organization is serving.
Hmm.
So that would be my biggest takeaway for people who are listening and wanting to either break into consulting or who are wondering how do I do it when it comes to racial equity or cultural responsiveness. It's our part of it is raising that awareness and just making the statement. This happened. This affirmative action strike down has occurred, and this is how it impacts your workforce. So
Hmm.
let's start and address it before it becomes something that's discussed at the staff level. Let's bring it up and be leaders as executives and bring it to the forefront of the conversation.
Definitely. So I hear you being proactive, right, and not just reactive.
Right.
Taking that intentionality, that intentional approach, and then also connecting it with that client or customer base.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
those are some phenomenal action steps that I think we can all take as consultant psychologists that are striving to make that meaningful change within the organizations that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So how can people find you and reach out to you and order your book when it comes out?
Yeah. So my website, www.steadyllc.com. And my email is drgabrielle@steadyllc.com. You can also reach me at Twitter, steady_LLC, or LinkedIn, Steady Clinical Consultation Training and Development, or my name, Dr. Gabrielle Jones. I have a personal LinkedIn account and a business LinkedIn account. So those are the platforms for which you can reach me. But the easiest way is my website, www.steadyllc.com.
Great. All right. I really appreciate it, Dr. Jones. It's a pleasure and honor.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you, Dr. Warner.
All right, thanks.